5, 6 years ago, where we some of us sat down and discussed opportunities, well, the challenges in the planning service and opportunities, and it's just been astonishing. The those ideas have come a long way, and I think we're now an exemplar service within this council, the shared council, joint councils, but also across the country. But one thing I'm very aware of, that it is the accelerating use of AI, and how it could, I just feel that it could almost become out of control, and we very much want to stay in control of how we use this as a tool so it doesn't swamp us. So, and one thing I'm aware of with conversations with Bill is about the necessity to understand where we want to go to. So forming an AI strategy that fits with where we are now and where we want to get to, and to ensure that, you know, we it's, but also without a doubt, it's a tool for all of us to use day to day, task to task. So it's not just, so it's, I'm sort of aware that we could just pick up what's readily available and just use it without really understanding how to make the best use of it with the tasks that we've got. And I know Bill's been talking about these issues for many years, and I just think some of his thoughts and philosophies might help us maybe pin down a strategy and make sure we're using these tools on a day-to-day basis, as well as the bigger platforms and that we've developed. Yeah, thanks.
Is it worth saying who I am in relation to you, Katie, so
Oh, yeah,
people
well,
understand exactly why we've
okay,
been
so
having
Bill
these
is my
conversations
husband.
about...
Bill is my husband, and we have many conversations about AI. And I then have these conversations with Heather and the kind of digital team. So it's a great relief for me that that you can listen to Bill now and ask him questions. Thank you.
Thanks,
So it might
Katie.
be worth putting in context. And if I shout loud enough, you'll hear me on Katie's microphone.
You're in the same room.
separate rooms. We've learned this over years of the COVID lockdown. Don't ever try in the same room. It never works.
So Bill, just you know, Katie very kindly introduced then. So I suppose just for Jane's maybe perspective as well, we do have a very small digital team in planning now that sits under Charlene, who's on the call, and that was very much because we recognise there's a lot of, you know, initiatives out there that are happening, and we were very fortunate that we're successful in a number of funding bids. Toby is sort of in charge of one of those, or part of that one of those funding bids, and this is around how we can help to speed up the processes and utilize AI effectively. So we're kind of on that journey, but it would be really great to hear from you and understand, you know, some of the sort of great work. I know that you were working on the BBC AI strategy, so it'd be fantastic to hear from you. And then, like Katie said, open it up to questions as well. Thank you.
I'm very happy to do that, and really pleased to have an opportunity to meet some of the people I've heard about, because I have heard about the great work you're doing and did read about it in the papers. Perhaps I'll start by sort of just giving you a bit of background to myself. So in my career, I've sort of had two strands to my career. I'm a technology journalist. I've written for the papers, done radio for many years, and report on what's happening in the world of everything, sort of computers, internet, AI, quantum, whatever you've got. I've been doing it for several decades now. And then I've also worked inside the IT industry. I worked for a local software house here in Cambridge. I worked for Acorn Computers back in the day when the ARM chip was being developed. So I remember the ARM chip being launched. And worked at the Guardian newspaper, where my sort of two strands of my life came together. And for the past decade or so, I've been at the BBC Research and Development. I sit in the research and development team at the BBC, and our mission is to help the BBC sort of prepare for and indeed shape the future when it comes to technologies, so that we can continue to deliver our public service mission. I also still write, broadcast, blog, and hang out. And several years ago, 9 or 10 years ago now, it was clear that what was called AI, machine learning, was becoming important, and started a program to have internal conversations and build an internal group called the AI ML community within the BBC, really to make sure that we were, as an organization, thinking about these issues. And then 3 years ago, when generative AI exploded, we were sort of ready and in a position to have some influence over the BBC's approach to it and its strategy. And I'm still very involved with that. And now, as the BBC looks to the renewal of its Royal Charter in 2028, we're starting to think about, well, how do we think about getting the language about AI into the Charter? And I've been going around saying the term AI must not appear in the BBC Charter, because it has to run to 2038, and we won't be talking about AI by then. So it'd be very dangerous to pin our hopes on it. So my background is as a computer scientist and also as a reporter. And I think that's given me a helpful perspective, both in appreciating the hype, understanding what's really going on, and certainly within the BBC, helping us think about the possibilities. And within my team in R&D, we've helped with many of the AI trials we've done. But then I've also watched with interest what's been happening in fact, the rest of the world. And in particular, thanks to Katie's position, what's been happening with planning, and obviously the work you've done with Plan AI, the, shall we say, slightly restless coverage of government announcements about how massive percentages of your time is going to be liberated by tools like Extract and other things like that, and the perhaps complex framing of the use of AI within local government and central government and elsewhere. One of my projects at the BBC has been establishing what's called our technology hub up in Newcastle in the northeast, and our building is a mere 7 miles away from a building called Cobalt Park, which is going to be home to the first AI growth zone. So we're also now getting directly involved in the ways that both economic policy and, if you like, planning on the ground is being shifted. And some of you may have been seen a paper yesterday that came from the Centre for Progressive Britain about AI growth zones and how all planning regulations need to be torn up to make way for these vital parts of infrastructure. And in that 40-page report, the word water appears 6 times, and each time it's coupled with energy, and it just says energy and water need to be sorted. There is no attempt in it to actually address what we know are very key infrastructure issues. So I try to put forward a realistic perspective on what the technologies are capable of doing, to think ahead in terms of what we want to achieve from them, but also to be very grounded in the reality of the fact that it's not fairy dust, it's not magic. In the end, it is transistors and silicon and power and buildings and data. Unless we recognize that, it's not the cloud, it's just somebody else's computer. Unless we recognize the cost of infrastructure needed to deliver and deploy these technologies, then we could find ourselves in a difficult situation where it becomes impossible to do the things we want to without enormous cost to people's lives or the environment. So I'm hoping that I'm balanced. I'm not a planning expert. Many of you are, so I will always defer to your better understanding of what you're trying to achieve within the service. But I'm very happy to talk about some of the work we've been doing in the BBC, and also perhaps to reflect on, if you're interested in, what government seems to be doing and what they might do. I work for the BBC, but I'm not speaking for the BBC today. I won't say anything that's not in the public domain, but it's not really intended to be shared on social media or spread beyond this group. Useful context. I'm happy to take the conversation in whatever direction you find helpful, Heather, or indeed Toby or Charlene, if you want to lead off as well.
I was really interested when you said that using the language of AI, using that term AI, because by, I think, was it 2038 you said, or I can't, yeah.
2038.
Can you explain that a bit more? Because that's really, I mean, I do think you're right. I think because I'm not an expert in this field. I think we use AI, digitization. You know, we've all got these terms that are just kind of floating around, which all mean something different to individuals. So it'd be good to understand that. I think that would be helpful.
I'm very happy to talk a bit about that broader context. So personally, I really don't like the term artificial intelligence or AI. I'll settle for machine learning. As somebody pointed out to me, it's only artificial intelligence if it comes from Silicon Valley. Otherwise, it's just sparkling statistics. As in, it's a term that has become so broad, it's effectively meaningless. It was coined in 1956 as a marketing term for a summer school at Dartmouth College in the States. And Professor Stuart Russell has said calling it artificial intelligence was a massive mistake because it set things up in a particular direction philosophically. And it's been impossible to get away from these ideas about these machines have become intelligent, artificial general intelligence, the supercomputers are going to take over the world. And that distracts from their actual utility as a different way of making computers work and solve a sets of problems in different ways that might be useful to us as human beings. And he prefers the term computational rationality. Okay, write that one down. Computational rationality, CR. If that had caught on in 1960, we wouldn't have been in the same place we are here today. So it feels to me that what you do when you call it AI is you flatten everything into people who don't really know much about the technology, a sense of this magic that just solves problems. Don't think too much about it. And you then avoid getting into the specific details of the different types of AI. For example, I said earlier, generative AI is very different from the rules-based systems that predated it and stuff like that, things that we in the BBC have been working with for 20 or 30 years now. I did a undergraduate dissertation about machine vision systems in 1980. You know, this stuff is not new, but some elements of it are new. And if you call it all AI, you lose that sense of it. There's also the sense of the parallel is the word content. You must have heard the word content on social media. I'm a content creator, whatever. Content flattens everything. Nobody went into the Sistine Chapel and said, wow, Michelangelo made some great content, didn't he? Okay. And within the BBC, we use the word content and it almost diminishes the quality of what we make. It's a television program, it's a documentary, it's radio, the specificity becomes important in understanding the characteristics of the thing you're making, the creative output. And I think specificity when it comes to the computer systems you are building is also quite important to help people understand the range of capabilities, perhaps the limitations, the applications it's suitable for, how it might work, the data needs and things like that. So there's a very big difference between all these systems. And the generic term AI, it feels to me, could have a shortish life because over the next 5 or 6 years, all of these capabilities are just going to get built into the tools we use. And we're not going to think of them as AI. And talking about adding AI into something just won't make sense. It won't feel coherent. Any of you who have a smartphone, I imagine that's all of you. There's so much, it's like sort of neural network based capability. Don't want to call it AI. Neural network based capability embedded in your phone at the moment. My Apple emails, there's the little summaries that appear now before you open the inbox. They're all being generated by, a machine learning system that sits on the phone. It's running on the phone, not even in the cloud. So the technology is becoming so pervasive that having this term for it, AI, doesn't help. And in many cases, when it comes to trying to persuade people about the systems you want to develop, saying AI only does not help clarify what you're trying to do and puts the people you're talking to in the same position as a desperate government press officer who's trying to shine up some new announcement by saying with added AI, but doesn't actually tell you anything useful. So in the context of the BBC Charter, we're trying to take out all of the technology specific stuff so that we don't get constrained to carry on using things when they're past their sell-by date. And also so that we are forced to be clear about the ways in which we want to use technology to help the BBC deliver its public purposes, but have the freedom to choose which technologies. I remember saying to somebody a while ago, it's one of these predictions that didn't turn out to be true, but if you have the word digital in your job title, you should be worried. Turns out the word digital is actually carried on for a good 5 years longer than I think it should, because everything's digital. I did actually have one success with the Director General of the BBC. We had a revised mission was going to be we were going to be the world's first global digital public service media organization. Sounds good. And myself and some colleagues persuaded him to drop the word digital because the last time anybody in the BBC actually edited a piece of analog tape, on a tape recorder, was 30 years ago. The BBC has been digital for a very long time. The word is now abused, and I think that AI as a term is being abused as well. And I would say to all of you, find a way to describe the thing you're doing so that you don't have to use that term, and you will find it has clarified your thinking enormously. It's worth the effort. Like, how would I describe this if I wasn't allowed to say AI? So you're going to say something too?
I was going to say, kind of my observation about a lot of the improvements that we've made over the last kind of couple of years really have been around kind of the management of what we hold kind of digitally and putting the kind of tools in place to extract that information and kind of use it for whatever purposes, performance monitoring, for example, in planning. But we're now kind of moving into this bit more uncomfortable space where there is the ability, for example, to use a large language model that Liverpool University are developing for us to summarize things, and using kind of machine learning, and that is both exciting but also potentially kind of terrifying. And also I guess from some of the concerns that I've got are just around, the public perception of public officers working for the council relying on machines to summarize sometimes very personal representations that they're making on planning applications. I don't really know what question I'm asking here, Bill, really, but I'm just kind of looking.
Yeah, it's a really good question. So you and it is that element of, okay, somehow there is almost an aura around large language models, largely thanks to GPT's marketing and the way tools like Anthropic's Claude represent themselves as being somehow empathetic, real intelligences instead of what they are, which is statistical machines, and that people feel somehow that there is a level of engagement with the machine that comes if you use an LLM that you wouldn't get if you said you're using Excel to analyze. And so you're having to cope with that when you want to, what you want to deploy is a technology that you understand very well, and you understand its limitations very well. And you also designed a system which has suitable safeguards in it to make you confident that it will achieve the outcomes you want. And it turns out, actually, we're really good at designing systems that include elements which are imperfect, infallible, and don't do what they want. They're called organizations with people in. Every person listening to this call is just as flaky as an LLM, and yet we are an efficient machine for working and delivering. So, we know how to do this. We just somehow don't apply that sort of critical thinking to when we're using LLMs with their degree of uncertainty. And I do think a lot of it is about, the desire of people like Sam Altman to become very, very rich and powerful has led them to create a situation within which there is deliberate confusion about these tools and these systems. And you, sadly, are at the sharp end of coping with that. So the only answers are on the BBC. So I'm going to say it's obviously public education, helping people understand better. We happen to have a public service broadcaster that will help you with that. So please increase the license fee. Contractual obligation fulfilled. But more seriously, that degree of understanding, but also clarity and transparency from you about what you're doing. And I think that publishing what you're up to, as much openness about the systems you're using and how they fit together is important, because the phrase I've been using is you want to be the human in the loop, not the hamster in the wheel. So you want to be the person who's controlling the deployment of these technologies. And that means using all of the systems thinking that you're good at already, all of the ways you've designed computer systems in the past, all the ways you've designed processes. I know about the transformation of shared planning over the last 5 years by becoming more efficient and more effective, by organizing yourselves in the appropriate way. All of those techniques apply as you deploy these technologies, but these technologies come with an element of public concern that hadn't existed before that you're having to deal with, and an element of sort of, as I say, deliberate confusion that makes it harder. Telling people what you're up to, acknowledging where you're going to have to intervene to keep the machines working correctly, all those things will help. And then perhaps there's the other sort of more political thing, which is to make sure that people like, the cabinet member for planning don't go around making unwarranted claims in public, in press releases and things like that, because I think it makes them look good and might help them get re-elected. You need to control what the politicians are saying around the capabilities of your systems to make sure that the public have the right expectations. And that applies all the way up to central government. One of the issues I've had with people like Peter Kyle is not that he's a bad politician, but he's saying things which are quite hard to justify in terms of what the technology is capable of. And then all the way down the system, people are having to scramble to make what the minister says come true. A significant part of my world, this is not for repeating, is trying to make sure the Director General of the BBC never says anything actually stupid about technology. Okay, that actually you control what is said at that high level, so that you don't end up having to deliver promises that end up distorting what you're doing. There's a politics to this as well, I'm afraid.
Yeah. Sorry, Toby, go on.
That's okay. I was going to ask a kind of separate question, actually, Heather. So if you want to go
so
first,
I was just no. What's really interesting, Bill, there is I think is from what you were saying earlier as well, is that obviously our powers that be in government are making some promises around the fact that we've got let's call it AI digital, I'm going to use those terms in this space,
it's necessary. We
so
don't
there's
have an
some
alternative yet.
So this kind of the promises around that seems to be, everything's going to be miraculously quicker, faster, cheaper, more effective, etc. Whereas from what we're saying is the reality is that isn't necessarily going to be the case, because there is going to be trade-offs here, and there are going to be that human intervention. It's not something that we know that the point of us doing this is to make us more effective in what we're doing, rather than let's be honest, cut a load of people out just because we're going to do things in a lot more faster than we could before. That isn't the case. It is just in a different way. And one of the pieces of work that we're doing is looking and trying to understand what skill set do we need as a kind of planning service to, if you just take us as planning, to be able to navigate through that and achieve what we need to achieve. So I suppose I've kind of trailed off into something else now, but I thought it was interesting when you said we totally support that viewpoint, that you're not just going to save a lot of money by just because of doing this with automation, digitization, machine learning, all the rest of it. It's just that all it does is make you more effective, potentially, if it's used in the right way.
I think that's right. I'll come back to you, Toby, but there are there's a couple of things embedded in what you said there, which I think are really interesting. That point about it's not about saving money, it's about being more effective. What I found certainly is it's something you need to put into every document. You must never allow a space within which it can slip to being about cost saving. Because once you do that, they'll come looking for those cost savings. And some of my work has been basically, at the point where somebody senior says, so how much are we going to save? Be able to push back and say, that's not the point. Yeah. It might end up reducing our costs, but we're not doing it for that reason. So we can't properly anticipate that until we've got to this level of the trial, until we've rolled out. But don't hold me to a number. Hold me to the numbers about KPIs, about effectiveness, about delivery times and things like that. I will do that. And try not to let it get built into the set of assumptions. And that's a real challenge at your level, Heather, right? That's where you're the one who gets to see and understand it. And the support from your staff, you can do that. But try not to make that the conversation. It's been what I found most effective. You lose some of the time, but at least you can make it not the premise. And that also, I think, helps reassure both your customers, you're not doing this to save money, and also the staff. Your point about skills is really important. The other side of that, which we're really coming up against, and I think a lot of other people are, is around career progression, particularly for junior staff. So there is a question about what's the pathway to being senior and effective, and does it involve doing work that is actually quite boring and dull? And if that work is then done by a machine, does the fact you haven't done it make it impossible for you to progress? If you're a lawyer, does the fact you haven't read through hundreds of cases and served briefs and worked for a barrister mean you can't actually progress? Because that gives you the core skill and understanding that you need. If you're a software developer using Copilot or another tool to write your code, if you haven't written it from scratch, does that make it impossible? We do not actually have an answer to this question yet in many professions, and it's worrying. And again, for me, it's the sort of thing which needs to be addressed face on. To say to junior staff, okay, you've all had the issue around you didn't actually work face to face with people because COVID happened 5 years ago. And now you're in a position where you may not be developing the core skills needed that have got Heather to where you are, Toby to where you are, because the machines can do some of those things. And the question is, therefore, what do you need to have done? What do you actually have? What is that new career path to progression? And I don't think we're giving enough thought to that at the moment. We are with our journalists. Yeah. So fortunately, there are elements of reporting like standing out in the street, vox popping people that are unlikely to be done by a humanoid robot for a while. But it's like thinking, what are the things they need to have done? And how do we build that in? I actually have a sneaky feeling that the growth of apprenticeships might give us a way to do that for a lot of professions, because apprenticeships are really adaptable, can change quickly. And so there's something in there. And I guess one of those things to think about. How does somebody get to be me when they won't have had the experiences I've had over the last 20 years, because the machines are doing quite a lot of it. But that, I think, if that's helpful, Heather.
Yeah, thanks, Bill. It's really interesting, isn't it? I mean, I kind of, I'm thinking back to you could apply this to anything though, couldn't you, in respect of the skill set and what you actually need to do. And I'm thinking, sorry, I'm going to go to my farming background here. Please. And the way we do things now is not the way that was done in the past. It's very, very automated. When we feed our chickens, our 48,000 chickens, it's all done automated. It's all based on the size of the egg. It's all calculated. That's all done by a machine for us. We don't do any of that anymore. If they need, their water adjusted, it's all done automatically. So it's incredible that there's a skill set there that isn't required. So I think for me, there's a difference between, if I was to take that analogy, what is actually required to enable us to become good planners is what I'm getting from you. But what are those bits that we could leave easily for a machine learning or whatever which way, and say, well, that bit you don't need to have a skill in that, but in some areas you may need to develop your skill by experiencing it, by actually doing it. Really, really
That's right.
interesting. Food for
Yeah,
thought there. Toby, I
it
think
is.
you wanted a question, didn't you? Sorry.
I'll
Yeah.
come back to Toby actually, because you just said something which echoes. So look at a tool like Extract, which is going to digitize planning documents. Yeah. How important is the skill of being able to look at two documents and understand they don't map for someone in their career? Maybe there needs to be time, maybe there needs to be training to do that, even though most of the time it's being done automatically, so that you can bound check the machine so you understand the issues. Again, it's starting to design career progression and training courses around working with the systems rather than just letting them replace the skills in some areas. So yeah, okay, going on too long. Toby.
Yeah, I don't know if this is the right analogy or not, but it does involve farming, Heather. I was listening to Mark Steele last night. He was in Rutland, and it was a Q&A session. Well, his show about Rutland, and when the reservoir was kind of formed, one of the farmers was saying, "Well, the only thing I'm going to be able to farm is hamsters." Because all of his land had been kind of consumed by water. And I was thinking, when you were talking about kind of water earlier, a couple of my daughters actually said, "Did you know, Daddy, that whenever you use AI to design your beer bottles, you're using a bottle of water for every request?" And it does kind of get me thinking, actually, kind of around the kind of environmental impacts of what we're doing, if we're relying on machine learning or a large language model to process 7,000 planning applications a year. Do we need to kind of rethink that strategy, particularly given that we're kind of, I know we're in an era of complete kind of water drought, but I don't know where the machine is that we're going to find the answer. If they're in Rutland extracting water from Rutland Reservoir, then are we okay? I mean, I'm a little bit lost around.
It's a good concern. Jane, you got your hand up. Do you want, is it building on this point, or should I deal with this and then come to you?
Deal with that one and then come along.
Okay, so I grew up in Corby, so I actually remember that reservoir being flooded. I remember it arriving. And, I've been at the bottom of that reservoir when it was a village. So it's quite a good analogy. Which view of the future would you like? Okay, so there's the doom-laden scenario, which is that the entire world's energy supply is going to go into data centers, and all the world's water will go into data centers, and it will bring about the apocalypse and the emergence of the Antichrist. And this is potentially a bad thing, unless you believe in the second coming, in which case it's a good thing eventually. At the moment, a lot of the statistics around energy and water use are out of date and exaggerated, which doesn't mean it's not a real problem. But there's a danger that it means the problem gets dismissed, and we're not being realistic enough in our assessment of it. So water doesn't get used. It's just that clean water becomes dirty water and has to be filtered again. Water doesn't go away. So the design of the systems that could be more efficient is feasible and is starting to happen. And the one thing that gives me hope is, in fact, this, because the computing power on this, the iPhone, this is not an iPhone 17, but the new one, is perfectly capable of processing your several thousand planning applications a day. What we're starting to do is to offload a lot of the stuff into trained models onto the edge. If you think about the design of the systems, the Apple Intelligence was the first tool to do that, which is basically, if you give a query, it's like the phone says, if I can do it, I'll do it. If I can't do it, I'll offload it to Apple's data center. If Apple's data center can't do it, would you like it to go to ChatGPT, to GPT-4? So they have this layered approach to it. And as the capabilities of the edge devices increase, and this is, unless accidentally, not water cooled. That the total compute capability of the planet is increasing so rapidly thanks to these powerful devices that, again, it's one of those things where with political will, a bit of intelligence, we can solve this problem. That will and intelligence doesn't seem to be there at the moment. So, didn't say I was optimistic. And if you look at the plans for people like NVIDIA and OpenAI to roll out Stargate data centers and things like that, they seem totally unrealistic in terms of the environmental impact. So you have to hope that they're being done to impress shareholders and increase share prices, but they don't really plan to do it. It'd be a vain hope. Again, there's a loop round to some political pressure and realism, and perhaps within the UK, as the government promotes the UK as a centre for as a base for these things, getting some intelligence. So you don't just do the Matt Clifford, let's roll over the planning system. You actually say, let's have a planning system which balances these things, because in 5 years' time, we're not going to need those data centres anyway in the same way because of the rate of development. I've contracted a lot of things into that answer. My ultimate answer would be that it is not the most pressing issue when it comes to the environment at the moment. Okay, it is an issue, and I certainly don't feel guilty about running queries on Gemini and stuff like that, because actually, if you almost everything you do online involves quite a lot of servers spinning up in various places. And at the moment, Gen AI is not as bad as people say it was. 2 years ago, it was much worse.
Yeah, thanks, Bill.
So
That's
try not to feel
reassuring.
guilty, but engage. So, Jane, you had a
Yeah.
question?
Oh, thanks, Bill. This is really fascinating, and I'm going to take a slight diversion as well. My first training, my first degree, my first work was as an archaeologist, and I remember from that learning about when iron came in, and the way, early iron tools probably had to be hammered out every time they were used. Probably almost less efficient than the ones before them, but you see where we are now with the use of metallics.
Yes.
And I wonder whether there's a real challenge for us in local authorities, and I'm going to go a little bit broader than planning here, because there's one thing about the people recognizing that these are tools and getting away from that kind of woo space. The other one is, are these tools how far along are we on that journey, and are we the right? I mean, planning, you're doing a great job, but for the rest of us, is it our space to be in there as innovators? How much, and when is the right moment? I think some of the challenges you've put in about how people build their careers and other things, I'm taking away completely, because it's really important. But there is a question for me in there about what's that right moment when we're not going to have to hammer it out every time we use it. Are we past that?
Analogy. That's a lovely analogy. No, not yet. Absolutely not. To give you a very concrete example, we built a system inside the BBC to support the local democracy reporters, the LDRs who sit in local papers. They file copy for the local paper, which is very good. And some of their copy is rewritten for the main BBC News website. But the copy you file for the Cambridge Independent is different from the BBC News website in style, in detail. You'd say there was a fire in Cambridge. You wouldn't say there was a fire at the end of Sturton Street, those sorts of things. And so we trained a model on BBC News content to do the first part of that rewriting, and it's very good. And that was 18 months ago, and we made it, and we're turning it into it's actually a tool that's now being used in the Eastern region and in Wales, and we're starting to see some impact. So now, instead of 2 or 3 stories an hour being rewritten from the news website, we can do 20 or 30. Massive increase in productivity. News stories that were local get a bigger audience. Everyone benefits. The reporters get more credit. A win. The model we trained was better than GPT-4. Now it isn't, because the quality just of an off-the-shelf model like Gemini 2.5 Pro has increased so much that with a bit of prompt engineering, you can make it do the job we actually had to train it for. And so we are still hammering out our tools. I think I'm going to borrow that one with credit in future. We are not there yet. Charlene, do you want to comment about this particular point or another one?
It sort of flows onto that.
Okay, let's just make one other point to Jane. The one thing we do is we talk to other media organisations and other broadcasters and find out what they're doing to figure out whether our pace of development is about right. We don't want to be at the bleeding edge, right? Some of our stuff in R&D is, but you'll never see that. We want to be, offering public value and stable and able to feel confident that what we're delivering is value for money in terms of the cost to develop versus the benefits that are achieved. So we talk to other people and they show us their stuff and we show them our stuff. And then when somebody senior says we're not moving fast enough, we can say, well, actually, Guardian, Reuters, whatever, they're about the same as we are. We're doing okay. And I think those sort of conversations, to say through the LGA, through other professional bodies, could be really useful. So
Yeah,
that would be my advice. Yeah.
If I
Very
can,
briefly.
Charlene, there is a risk which you haven't done in the planning. There's lots of off-the-shelf but quite expensive products being offered, and I wonder if they are a bit like the tool that you've just talked about. And in fact, in a year's time, we'd have done better just waiting, and ChatGPT would do it for us.
It might
And
be.
I-
And the
and-
question.
Sorry, and I was just going to add to that. I think one of the things that we reflected on, because we did a digital directory presentation yesterday with Laura Terry and James Fisher, but one of the things that was clear from that is that there's lots of councils doing different things. So I think the point that you're making, Bill, is we can't do it all. We can't do it all ourselves. But if we're on the journey for the pinch points that we are experiencing, and then another council is on the journey for their the bits that they're experiencing, hopefully we can share that knowledge. I think that's for me is critical as well.
No,
so sorry,
it
Charlene,
is.
I just
No,
jumped in.
I agree. And finally, before Charlene will come to you, the question to ask anyone offering a bespoke solution is, how is it updated and how do you change the underlying model? And if they say you can't, then they are a bad idea. Their system should be built compartmentalized to do that.
Thanks.
Okay. Charlene.
All right,
Sorry
I'm
to
just
keep
making
you
note
waiting.
of that because that's really useful. Yeah, I mean, sort of what Jane and Heather have both been saying is it's that for me, it's trying to get to grips with the technology changing constantly, and it's that not wanting to be at the very leading edge and the very pointy section of it because there is a risk involved at that point, but it's knowing when, you know, almost to step into that treadmill and not being too far behind. You know, I've been with the council a very long time, and I can remember less than 10 years ago, we weren't doing direct debits over the phone, you know, to set them up. And it's like, I'm sorry, what? How can we not be doing that? You know, we were that far behind for something that everybody else was doing. And it's that, for me, it's trying to pick that point of when to step into the treadmill. And the other point you made about being able to change the underlying model, and actually it almost goes back to you're saving time on staff because they're not processing the stuff, but what you've needed to do is shift it to developers to keep you at the forefront, to get that development in place to progress, so you don't become a stationary product. Like you were saying, that 18 months ago your product was brilliant, it's now behind again, and you've got to have that. And I hadn't considered that element either, that you've got to have that development constantly feeding into the background.
You do with these technologies, they are so not stable, and indeed it doesn't look. Again, perhaps a good analogy is the people on this call. Your staff are not stable either. People get new jobs other places, they want career development opportunities, they decide to have career breaks, they go off and do things, and yet we manage systems in which there's a churn. You know, I've had people who left my team, and I'm really pleased they've left because they progressed to the point where we couldn't offer them anymore, and they were ready to fly, and they've succeeded elsewhere. So we expect our IT systems to be more stable. Well, maybe with these tools, we need to start shifting those assumptions slightly and coping more with the uncertainty and the change. And that's a big sort of almost an emotional investment, I fear. Bigger question than this conversation. The practicalities of it, though, are that again, from what I know about the transformation of shared planning over the last few years, you now have the capability to take your heads up, to look up from the desk from time to time in a way that you didn't. This is a journey we're currently going on in the product group inside the BBC, right? Until recently, the amount of sustained effort from our developers was in the 80s, 90%. Yeah. Most of the work we did was just keeping the thing running. minor changes. And what the product team are trying to do now is to create space for innovation, to create that headroom, as our director of engineering calls it, within which we can innovate. And the better you run the systems that you've currently got, the more capability you have to think those deep thoughts at every level in the organization. It's not about senior staff having that. It's about a junior planning officer, a software developer, whatever, having the capability to look around and think, actually, this could be different, and have a little bit of time to explore, and have an organization that is receptive to the thing I might say, and it might have a little bit of time to explore, and we might find something. If all you're doing is processing applications, if all you're doing is heads down doing the job, then quite rightly, you can't do anything else. It's impossible. And then the constant rate of change becomes really threatening. So by being a better department, you also create the possibility to cope with these changes. And I know it's easy for me to stand here or sit here and say that because I'm not you. I don't have to do it, but that is the thing that seems to make the difference. It is the thing that seems to make the difference.
I would absolutely support that, Bill. I think we've been on that incredible journey that you do go on as a shared service, where you do the change management and you drop. It's natural. There's a natural curve to it, and you come out of that. And then when you do, that's when you have that headspace to start to really gain traction, and then your trajectory gets a lot faster, simply because you've got that kind of headspace, and we're fortunate we have the will of our members, Katie, but also our leaders, Jane, so that is really,
Yes.
really helpful to have those that support, and know we've got that support is brilliant. So yeah, thank you.
And the
I
other side of
totally
it is,
chime with that.
you become part of a community of good practice as well. Again, this is what we find. There's a thing we call the Gen AI Salon that we run once a month, where some senior people from media organizations come together to talk about our experiences and what's happening, and share good and bad experiences. And that means also you don't have to, slightly to Toby's point earlier, you don't have to do all of it. You focus on the things that matter to you, and other people are doing what they're doing, and you learn from them. And then when you have the time or capacity to think, oh, we'd like to do that thing as well, you've got friends who have done it who can help share their battle stories or whatever they may have been, or the success stories, to help you do it better. So you're not trying to move forward on everything at once and change everything at once, which for anybody working in the organization is really challenging. You're focusing and doing things. So I think the way you're currently doing things, particularly the trials and then scaling them up, and being very measured about the claims you're making about the difference it will make, is the right way forward. And again, it's one of the things we did inside the BBC was, early on in the process, we established a structure that had a steering group for generative AI of senior people like the director of news and members of the executive committee and the head of our AI research team, whatever, which was looking at everything. They had ultimate responsibility. Anything that involved Gen AI in the BBC, they should be aware of and could, if necessary, change or kill. The power was put in one place. Underneath that was something called the Central Design Authority, which took a technical perspective on trials. So if you wanted something to progress from trial to being funded to scale, it had to go through the CDA. So again, there was one node of technical experts from across the business who would just evaluate it. And there was a center of deep research in R&D, which was, we were building our own models. We were doing the hardware. We built a deep fake detector for images that outperforms the commercial models, because we trained it on BBC News material. So we are really good at this. And that was a center of deep expertise. And I used to say foundational expertise, but people confused foundational with foundation models. So I stopped saying that. Deep expertise. And then we also built an AI hub, which was a team of people, and this is just getting formed now, who will drop into the business in particular places and help solve specific problems and then walk away again. So if you're a data scientist in our audience's research team and you want to start using an LLM to do analysis of the information you've got to help us understand a particular demographic, then John Howard's team can come and spend 4 weeks working with you to build the tooling you need to get it all working, to make sure you're happy with it, and then they'll go off and you now have a new tool. And that approach has been effective in allowing us to move forward in a measured way and to be sort of to get backing internally for the things we're doing. And then in public, we made it very clear that the core statement is we're the world's most creative media organization. Human creativity is the heart of what we do. We will never compromise that. Well, we're the country's best planning department. Effective service to customers is what we do. We will never compromise that. You know, there are things you can say out loud about the principles that you will apply that are both reassuring and heartening for people. Those two things together, having the internal structures that allow you to feel you're in charge of what's going on, and in particular, you have visibility. Yeah, just really made a difference. Yeah, the fact is that the executive committee of the BBC was comfortable with this because there were 3 ExCo members on that Gen AI steering group. There was the right level of visibility and control, and then we could get on with it and actually do things quite quickly. That made a difference as well. So again, I'm not suggesting you want to model it exactly on us, but those are the things that worked for us.
Thanks.
I'm conscious of the time, so I don't know if anybody else would like to ask any questions or make any points. I'm very happy to do that. Laura?
Just wondering if we could book another session in with you. I just find the whole thing really, really fascinating, and yeah, I just thank you so much for your time. My first thing on my task list is to change my job title, so I don't want to be digital project manager anymore. But no, I mean, I suppose want to pick your brain about what the BBC plans to do in the next, few years coming up. What is their AI strategy? It's just all that sort of, because what you've said about even the structure is really, really interesting and something that we certainly can bring in.
Yes. Well, again, you'll find a structure that works for you, but having a structure, in fact, it's one of those things where just having decided helped. Yeah, not letting it drift. We decided we would do it this way, and at times it was difficult and complicated, but we stuck with it. And so, yes, I'm very happy to continue the conversation. I'm sure Katie will facilitate that. Next time we should try to do it in person, over a cup of coffee. Yeah, other people can join my team as well. I'm very happy to share more. There's quite a lot of stuff about this on the BBC website. I'll get Katie to send in the link. So there's stuff you can, we've blogged about it, we've written about our approach. Again, we're trying to do it in the open. So we've just done a trial recently, which is really popular. Actually, this one might work for council meetings, Katie. We have commentary on football matches on local radio, and people can't listen to it. So we've now got a tool which transcribes the commentary in real time from our local reporter and turns it into social media type posts, and then posts them out up on our live blog every few minutes. And that works really well because you've got a constrained vocabulary. You know the names of the players so you don't get them wrong. And there's really quite a limit to the sorts of things that might be going on, So if the machine says alien spaceship has landed, that's probably not the case. But, you can constrain the level of hallucinations quite well. And people who can't listen to the commentary could just pick it up on their phone, really like it. And again, it's another added value service. We would never pay somebody to do this, but we can do it automatically. So I can imagine, why not live tweet council meetings by doing it automatically? Get more listeners than on YouTube. Sorry, that's just me being random at the moment.
And that would be great because we put all of that effort in, and I think we could probably, sorry, Katie, but I could probably name the people who are watching it. Yeah.
I'm one of them.
And a lot of them are staff.
Yeah.
Oh, but Katie, you told me that the local democracy reporters all watch on catch up to get all their quotes.
Yes, they
So
do.
It's a valuable public service. It's a valuable public service from my fellow reporters.
I think there's so many good ideas there, Bill. So, and again, I think we can have further conversations, and we'll arrange that with Katie. I really like the point you made there, just to kind of before we wrap up, around making it clear what our proposition is. I think that was, you know, really positive, that we say these are the areas we're not going to compromise on as part of our kind of offer or our journey or our sort of strategy moving forward. And I think that's a really critical element that we need to take away and consider. And yeah, I thought that was really another golden bullet there, I think, for us to take on board.
Well, I'm glad that's helpful. Separately from this call, I'm very happy to share some of our internal documents with you, Heather, as a basis for that. It's always not material which we wouldn't make public, but you might find helpful. So let's have a further conversation. The City Council shared planning matter a lot to me, and not just because of my wife. I live in Cambridge and have done for a very long time, and what you do is really important to the city I love and to the county I live in and to the world I live in. So I'm really pleased if I can be at all useful and if this has been of all of interest. So thanks for having me.
Thank you, Bill.
Thank you.
Thank you very
Thank
much.
you.
Thank you for inviting me.
Thank you, Bill. That was really useful.
Yeah,
Thank
it
you very
was.
much.
Take care. Thank you, everybody. Thank